This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Oteli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. The world's defense heavyweights are in Singapore for Asia's top security summit. Vietnam's President To Lam will deliver the keynote speech tonight. What signal will he send and to whom? Our team is on the ground with a preview. Also, New Zealand is making its biggest defense reset in years, with spending set to nearly double by 2033. But after years of underfunding, is it enough? Our reporter speaks to New Zealand's defense minister. Also, a pivotal debate in Europe, with Brussels under pressure to shield key industries from cheap Chinese imports. But the bloc is divided over how far to go. And Taiwan sharply raises its GDP forecast, with the tech-driven economy now expected to grow 9.6% this year, its fastest pace in 16 years, on strong AI demand. Chinese tech powerhouse Tencent holds an open house for its huge new headquarters in Shenzhen. Our correspondent Deborah Wong takes us on a tour of Penguin Island, where tech naturally blends into workers' daily routine. The world's top security and defense leaders are gathered in Singapore from today to discuss challenges in Asia, the wider Indo-Pacific, and the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East and Europe. And in about 2 hours, Vietnamese President To Lam will deliver a keynote speech at the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue. He is expected to talk about how his country is engaging global defense policymakers in these times of geopolitical uncertainty. Also present, Timor-Leste President Dr. Jose Ramos Horta, Singapore President Tharman Shanmugaratnam, Defense Minister Chan Chun Sing, and U.S. Defense Chief Pete Hegseth. While China did not send its top brass, it does have a delegation present from the People's Liberation Army National Defense University. And we're joined now by CNA Senior China Editor Olivia Seong and Senior Correspondent for ASEAN Leong Wai Kit, live from the event itself. First to you, Olivia. Official proceedings about to begin. Just get us up to speed with what exactly has been happening at the Shangri-La Hotel.
Well, Ateli, I can tell you that the activity and the energy level here at the Shangri-La Hotel has probably gone up a notch over the past hour or so as we count down to the keynote speech by Vietnamese leader To Lam. Wai Kit will have more on that, but I want to just show you what's happening here where I am. A lot of media attention has been focused here at the hotel lobby. You can see lots of cameras and journalists staking out this spot because, after all, there are 44 countries being represented here at this security summit, and what that means is lots of opportunity for engagement. And so we've seen defense ministers, military officials, academics, those from the private sector crisscrossing this space, heading over to meeting rooms or sitting down over coffee for talks. We also know that U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is here in the hotel, and we know that he met his Singaporean counterpart Chan Chun Sing earlier in the day. But even before that, we know that he was off-site exercising with U.S. troops on board a U.S. warship that is docked here in Singapore. And here's what he had to say to them.
We'll be sitting in a bunch of meetings today, talking to a lot of ministers of defense. Some of it's going to be great, some of it's going to be really boring. But it's important to build our alliances with our allies, what we're doing out here. But none of it matters. Literally, none of those meetings matter. And they're important, they're significant. I send here on behalf of the President. None of it matters without what you do.
Well, lots of attention is going to be on Secretary Hegseth and that speech that he's set to make tomorrow morning as the Iran war continues to loom in the background. But what we'll also be looking out for is his tone with regard to China. If you recall last year, he did say in his speech, it was his first here at the Shangri-La Dialogue, that China poses an imminent threat to the region. So what tone will he take this time round following U.S. President Donald Trump's recent visit to China? Also, we have to note that last year, China made a strong response. It said in turn it was the U.S. that was stirring up tensions here in the region, and it made its position very clear, even though its Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun was not present. Mr. Dong is not present again here this year for the second straight year in the row. Instead, China being represented by a delegation of military experts and scholars.
Right, now I want to bring Waikid into our conversation now. We know that President To Lam, he's on a state visit to Singapore. He's also the keynote speaker of the Shangri-La Dialogue. So what are some of the things we should be looking out for in his speech?
But before I go into that, let me quickly address what Ollie said earlier in her live cross. Unlike her location, where she described her energy, there's not much energy here yet, but give it some time, Oteli, because like you said, in 2 hours' time, the keynote speech will be made by Mr. To Lam, and the ballroom behind me will be where all the action is happening. So that energy, I guarantee you, will flow to this part of the hotel. Back to your earlier question, let's start with the state visit. Mr. To Lam has wrapped up his trip to Singapore, where he met President Tharman Shanmugaratnam as well as Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. I've also had a glimpse of Mr. To Lam's planned itinerary and meetings on the sidelines while at the Shangri-La Dialogue. These are planned meetings. Some have already materialized, but it's still fluid. But based on what's planned, the countries that the Vietnam delegation will meet will, of course, include Singapore, the US, Japan, Timor-Leste, and Australia. Now, looking at this lineup, you get a sense of the strategic thinking behind Vietnam's foreign policy. Many of these countries, most of these countries are CSPs, which are your comprehensive strategic partnerships to Hanoi. And this is, in a nutshell, the highest level of diplomatic hierarchy, if you will. And if you look at the planned meetings, again, it would allow in each meeting for Hanoi to articulate what's important to it in its foreign policy, your strategic balance, economic security, as well as perhaps your ASEAN integration. That said, the good summary of how Hanoi looks at foreign policy would be, like I said earlier, the keynote speech that's happening in about 2 hours' time in this part of the hotel.
Right, and I know that this next question is for the both of you, but I would just like to get Olivia to start this off first. I mean, good things all come in threes, and there are lots of things to be looking out for at this dialogue. So, but what are the top 3 things, Ollie, you'll be looking out for this weekend?
I'll tell you, yes, tough to pick, but first on my list is how the US-China relationship is going to play out. We know that the Chinese Defense Minister is not here. Instead, the delegation is being led by Major General Meng Xiangqing, who is a professor with the National Defense University of the People's Liberation Army. How will he respond to Secretary Hex's speech? We know that he will be speaking at a smaller special session tomorrow. The second thing that we'll be looking out for also are the Japanese and South Korean defense ministers who will be making their debut here at the Shangri-La Dialogue. We know that there are simmering tensions between China and Japan over those comments made by the Japanese Prime Minister over Taiwan. And my third thing that I'll be looking out for is how the situation in the Middle East and the Iran war, how is that going to be discussed here at the dialogue? We know that Qatar's Deputy Prime Minister and Defense Minister will be speaking here at one of the plenary sessions, and we know that they are involved in the negotiations between Iran and the US. So there'll be a lot to look out for, but those are my top 3.
And Waikid, jump in here now. What are your top 3?
Yeah, it is still this historic keynote speech, because I want to see to what extent Vietnam is using this SLD platform to advance its own interests on the world stage. I'm also very keen, since I cover ASEAN, on the special address by Timor-Leste President Jose Ramos Horta. Dili is, of course, the newest ASEAN member. We will get a sense of Dili's worldview and how it further plans to integrate into ASEAN. And the last thing I'm looking out for, because I can only pick 3, the last thing I'm looking out for is perhaps any progress or next step of the AUKUS deal, which is basically your nuclear-powered submarine project between UK, US, and Australia, because any headlines about AUKUS would have implications on the Indo-Pacific.
Right, lots to look out for. Thank you so much to you both. CNA Senior China Editor Olivia Seong and Senior Correspondent for ASEAN, Leong Waikid. In other news, EU Commission leaders are set together today for talks on ramping up trade defenses against what's now widely described as China Shock 2.0. Now, the meeting will review the EU's economic and trade policies in light of what Brussels sees as unfair competition from Chinese rivals. The trade gap between Beijing and the 27-nation bloc is getting wider. The EU trade deficit with China hit around $420 billion last year, meaning Chinese exports exceeded EU imports significantly. Beijing, in response, has warned that it will take necessary measures to safeguard its legitimate rights and interests. Well, Scott, William Denslow has been tracking the story for CNA, and he joins us live from Brussels. So, William, European leaders, they've been talking about de-risking, not decoupling from China. So what does that strategy mean in practice, and is the EU now moving towards a tougher stance?
Well, as far as Beijing is concerned, as you mentioned, they believe that the tactics or what's being proposed by the European Commission amounts to protectionist policies. That is certainly not how the Commission sees it. We've heard from Stéphane Séjourné, the Commissioner for Industry here in Europe. He says, as you mentioned, that this is not a break in the relationship, not a breakup, but more of a rebalancing. Essentially, he says that the threats posed by what they deem as unfair trade practices by Beijing amounts to an existential threat facing a number of critical industries here in Europe, industries including chemicals, including metals, including clean technologies as well. That is why commissioners are gathering to discuss what could come next, using some of the defensive tools at its disposal. This could mean the potential of introducing quotas, tariffs on top of those quotas if they're exceeded going forward. But real questions as to whether there is the political appetite to take such action.
So, Will, there appears to be a divide within Europe with countries like France and Italy. Well, they are pushing for tougher action, but Germany remains somewhat cautious. So help us understand this then. Why is Germany reluctant to escalate trade tensions with Beijing?
That's absolutely right. There are real divisions, despite the fact that there being large consensus, at least from those at the European Commission, that the trade relationship is, in many eyes, unfair and perhaps not sustainable for a number of sectors. That is why we've seen really this push from the European Commission to try and bolster its competitiveness on the world stage. And this is seen as a core tenet of it. But, of course, member states very much need to have buy-in as well. And you mentioned the discrepancies, the likes of Germany. Their auto sector incredibly sensitive to the Chinese market. That is why there are some reservations there. While for the French industries, such as the metals sector, far more seeking to be more perhaps protectionist in nature. Interestingly, there have been reports that Spain, that was initially supportive of this proposal that was floated most aggressively, perhaps, by Paris, have now somewhat grown more concerned. Spain, of course, is one of those in Europe that seem to have the strongest relationship with Beijing.
And the EU, much like other countries, also looking to diversify their supply chains, especially when it comes to rare earths and semiconductors. But, Will, how realistic is it, though, for Europe to reduce its dependence on China in these critical sectors?
This has been a huge topic, not just competitiveness for the EU, but to be more resilient as well, to be able to absorb global shocks, whether they're from choke points seen with the Strait of Hormuz or with growing trade disputes, be it with China, the likes of the United States. That is why we've seen these free trade agreements either brokered or gaining traction with the likes of India, with the likes of Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, to name just a few, Mercosur, the bloc of South American nations as well. However, these kinds of deals, they take a long time, and individually, they're just far smaller than these huge trade deals with the likes of China. So it is seen as part of a broader strategy for the European Union. But any kind of seismic break from Beijing overnight would certainly be catastrophic when it comes to their reliance on things like these critical rare earths.
Well, thanks for breaking down that EU-China trade tensions for us. William Denslow there reporting from Brussels. Well, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, wage negotiations in South Korea becoming more aggressive, with a minority Samsung Electronics union challenging a pay deal in court, and Kakao's union pressing for profit-sharing bonuses. Plus, China's export prices are rising at their fastest pace in 3 years, lifted by AI demand. But not every exporter is benefiting. Hello again. Good to have your company this Friday evening on East Asia Tonight. We've got Olivia Marzuki standing by now with the very latest in business news. So, Liv, it appears that Taiwan's economy is getting a major lift from the global AI boom. Tell us more.
That's right. So, Otelli, we know that Taiwan plays a key role in the global AI supply chain led by TSMC, the world's largest contract chip maker. And with AI demand surging, Taiwan is reaping the benefits. The economy is on track for its fastest growth in 16 years, powered by the global boom in artificial intelligence. The government expects GDP to grow 9.6% this year, sharply higher than its earlier forecast of 7.7%. And that would mark the island's strongest expansion since 2010. The Statistics Agency also revised first quarter growth higher to 14.5%, the fastest quarterly pace in nearly 48 years. Strong AI demand drove Taiwan's economy to expand nearly 9% last year and was among the top performers globally. Its stock market also on a tear, trading near a record high and passing India as the world's fifth biggest by market cap. The officials say demand from the AI build-out is beyond expectations, even as the Middle East crisis roils global oil markets. South Korea also benefiting from the AI boom, but a recent decision on profit sharing at Samsung Electronics has complicated matters for some business owners. A minority union is planning to challenge the recently approved wage agreement. The labor group has been criticizing the deal for mainly benefiting employees in the chip unit, leaving out workers from other divisions. The Samsung Electronics Co-Union, which has about 13,000 members, mostly consists of workers from its consumer electronics department. It initially filed an injunction to suspend the vote that took place this week. A legal counsel for the union said it will be asking the court to suspend the implementation of the pay deal. Documents are to be submitted next week, and a ruling is expected to take place within a month. The pay deal could see workers in the semiconductor division getting annual bonuses averaging about $400,000. Those in other units are estimated to receive some $4,000. The agreement was struck in the 11th hour to avert a planned 18-day strike. But Samsung Electronics Co-Union left negotiations before the deal was finalized, citing concerns that it was unfair to workers outside the chip division. And South Korean tech firm Kakao has called union demands for profit sharing unrealistic. The remarks were made after government-mediated talks broke down earlier this week. Kakao management said the compensation ask would place a huge burden on operations. It added that pay should be aligned with a company's ability to invest in the future and shareholders' interests as competition in the AI sector is intensifying globally. The union has not disclosed its exact demands, but reports say that workers discussed allocating 10% of operating profit to bonuses. Union members across Kakao and 4 affiliates have backed a plan to stage a strike next month. And this comes in the wake of a deal clinched by Samsung Electronics Union. Chinese tech giant Tencent is holding a public open house for its new headquarters in Shenzhen this weekend. But it's not just any building. The campus spans 809,000 square meters and is built entirely on reclaimed land. Penguin Island, named so after Tencent's mascot, may only be 30% done, but there are already more than 14,000 employees working there. The island can accommodate around 80,000 people when work is completed, and it includes conference and exhibition venues, schools, a museum, office spaces, as well as 11 blocks of staff dormitories. CNA's Deborah Wong had the first-hand look at the life on the island.
This massive campus is as big as 113 football fields. Where I am right now is the R&D center, and all the way to the back are staff apartments, a sports center, a clinic, and even tool schools. Now, getting from one block to another can be quite a walk. So people here use autonomous vehicles like this, and they can even take you all the way to a metro station just outside the island. And then we have solar-powered benches just like this. Now, it's a clear sunny day in Shenzhen, and so it's absorbing a lot of energy right now, which is great because then I can charge my phone just like this. And these are just a few examples of how deeply integrated tech is in daily life on this island.
我觉得印象比较深刻的就是那个无人的摆渡车，然后有一些无人的那种穿梭公交吧，就是可以在园区直接就坐到市区，就到宝安市区。那我觉得可能这个是比较新颖的一个点吧。
比如说我在那边的园区，我不知道你逛过很多没有，它在很低空的玻璃上贴了防鸟状的贴纸。然后我们有小孩过来说上面贴纸好可爱，什么鸟？然后就有人可能很多工作人员都在说这是什么鸟什么鸟。深圳这边会有很多迁徙的鸟类，我也不是很明白。然后他说这个贴纸贴在这边就是怕鸟飞过来看不到，然后告诉他不要撞过来。然后我就突然感觉到一个比较你知道腾讯嘛，很科技的一个地方。它有一些比较人性、比较 soft 的一个方面，让我先看到了，我就觉得还是蛮感动的。
Fresh from her trip to Penguin Island, Deborah Wong now joins us live from Shenzhen. Deb, sounds like an interesting trip there. Tencent is framing Penguin Island as more than a new headquarters. What is the broader economic significance of the location, and what could it mean for the race to attract tech talent?
When we look at China's push for self-resilience in science and technology under its new 15 five-year plan, the smart city model that we see Penguin Island encompasses really becomes more significant. It becomes even more visible. You know, we've just seen some examples of how tech is used. It enables R&D to be carried out, tested in real time. You've seen the autonomous vehicles picking people up, and there are also robots patrolling the island, doing deliveries, maintenance. We didn't see all that today because the event was going on, and so they had to put them aside for the time being. But I want to talk about the location right now. Penguin Island is situated in Qianhai district. Now, that's an economic zone within Shenzhen city, and that zone is also identified as an international spot because it fosters cross-border collaboration with Hong Kong and international partners. So what it does is a signal that Tencent does have global ambitions. I spoke to an analyst to understand what kind of draw this would have on talent, and he says that because the entire development is set up in a campus style, it can attract overseas talent and also talent from other provinces. And if we look at the staff apartments that I talked about earlier, it's going for 2,000 yuan. For a small studio, and that's about 300 USD, which is half the market price. So it is, quite incentivizing. Let's have a listen.
The big move, I think, represents, Tencent's ambition to be more global, to make sure they get even more value out of their own internal, talents, pools, resources by consolidating all the important parts of the group. Quite a number of, great universities from both, basically the rest of mainland China, including Zhejiang University, Peking University, Tsinghua, but also, universities from Hong Kong. They have already started something in Shenzhen. And I believe, with Tencent becoming more like a campus, more like a university, it will absolutely help, Shenzhen to become like a university city or town.
Now, that's important because Shenzhen, as a Tier 1 city, doesn't have as long a history as other Tier 1 Chinese cities like Beijing and Shanghai, where there are top universities that attract a lot of overseas talent and top talent as well. And so Professor Ben believes that this could eventually pave the way for more branded universities to set up in Shenzhen and so then attract more people to come into the city. And now this is very important because the influx of tech companies together with Penguin Island is going to be, a very appealing development for talent to come. And it's key because this is the kind of model that China is urging for, deeper integration between industry and universities because they believe this synergy will allow China to produce more high-quality innovation. And it really is part of the global tech race that China is in right now. And we also understand that Penguin Island could be one of the landmarks that overseas delegation could visit when APEC rolls around in November. So it really does, portray this as a symbol of China's tech prowess beyond just economic development. Back to you.
All right, Deb, thank you for being our eyes and ears on the ground as always. Deborah Wong reporting from Shenzhen. China's export prices rising at their fastest pace in 3 years, driven by higher energy costs and booming demand for AI-related technology. Overall export prices rose 5% in April from a year ago, the biggest increase since 2023, and a sharp turnaround after years of declines. The strongest gains were seen in mineral fuels, including petroleum products, which jumped 22%. Fertilizer prices were also up 17%, reflecting higher natural gas costs. A global rush to build AI infrastructure has also pushed up chip prices, lifting the value of electronics and machinery exports by more than 20%. But the gains were not broad-based. Prices for many traditional manufactured goods, including textiles and plastics, continue to fall. Analysts say that intense competition is making it difficult for manufacturers to pass on higher costs, squeezing profits, and potentially weighing on wages and consumer spending. And it's been a tech-heavy week, particularly in Taiwan, where NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang is visiting. Last night, he met with some of the island's top names in tech. Among them, longtime IISS chair Johnny Shi, Quanta Computer chairman Barry La, who's been dubbed Taiwan's AI missionary, and as well as TSMC CEO C.C. Wei. Chiefs of global chip makers like Intel and Qualcomm are expected in Taiwan next week. Industry watchers are expecting discussions on securing the AI supply chain in Taiwan. Earlier this week, NVIDIA also announced it is building new headquarters in Taipei.
NVIDIA was spending about $10-15 billion a year in Taiwan. Now we're spending going to $150 billion in Taiwan each year.
NVIDIA spends, at this point, hundreds of billions of dollars in AI infrastructure, and most of our spend is in Taiwan. And so we've invested through the best form of investment, which is business, hundreds of billions of dollars into Taiwan.
Jensen Huang spoke to CNA on Taiwan and the future of jobs, as well as leadership in the AI era. That full interview on CNA Correspondent in an hour. Catch it here on CNA, CNA.Asia, and our mobile platforms. And that's our Wrap in Business, Ottilie, for the week. Back to you.
Thanks so very much for that, Olivia. All right, coming up on East Asia tonight, more coverage from Shangri-La Dialogue right here in Singapore. The forum is set to focus on how major powers are looking to manage competing crises. Our senior correspondent Olivia Seong returns with a guest to unpack what's at stake. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Global defense leaders are gathering at Asia's premier defense summit for talks on security challenges facing the Indo-Pacific. All eyes are on the keynote speech later tonight, set to be delivered by Vietnam's President To Lam. Now, New Zealand is making its biggest defense reset in years, with spending set to nearly double by 2033. New Zealand Defence Minister Chris Penk speaks with CNA about how he plans to see this through. And Taiwan sharply raises its GDP forecast, with a tech-driven economy expected to grow 9.6% this year. That's the fastest pace in 16 years on strong AI demand. The security challenges across Asia and the wider Indo-Pacific in focus for defense and security ministers, as well as military chiefs gathered at the Shangri-La Dialogue. And I've got CNA senior China editor and senior correspondent Olivia Seong joining us live from the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore yet again. And Olivia, you've got plenty to unpack in terms of what's at stake at this year's dialogue. And I believe you have a guest to help you do just that.
Yes, Natalie, I'm certainly glad that I'm having some assistance here to unpack all that's about to happen here at the Shangri-La Dialogue. I'm joined by Mr. Ng Chee Ken, who is Director and CEO at the IISS Yusof Ishak Institute here in Singapore. Chee Ken, thanks so much for joining us this evening. First off, let's just start by talking about the Shangri-La Dialogue as an event. It's been billed as Asia's premier security summit. Given all that's happening around the world in geopolitics, how does it still remain relevant today?
Well, today's context, the international environment is more volatile than ever. And in such an environment, it becomes even more difficult for anybody to make informed decisions, good decisions. So having a forum like that where more than 50 senior officials, defense ministers are gathered is a great opportunity for countries to lay out their positions, to have them scrutinized, and then for each other to understand the policy positions and the nuances of each other better. In that way, it makes for better policy making. In addition, besides the big sessions, there are lots of smaller side meetings where people re-establish relationships, maintain relationships, and that's really quite crucial.
You mentioned it's important for people to talk, but how much of the relevance of the Shangri-La Dialogue depends on the representation, especially by major powers like the US and China? We know that the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is present, but his Chinese counterpart is not. They're China represented by a relatively lower, delegation. So, what's your take?
Well, for sure, everybody looks forward to actual meeting of the minds between the Secretary of War, Secretary of Defense of the U.S. and the Chinese Defense Minister. So, it is a pity that the Defense Minister of China is not here today. But at least Secretary of War Hegseth coming indicates that the US is still placing a lot of importance on the region. It's particularly important because I think given what's happening in the Middle East, many people are in fact questioning whether the US presence in this region is here to stay. Admiral Dong not coming, I guess, conceivably is for good reasons. There are lots of military reshuffles going on in China, so maybe he has to attend to that, but it is a pity. In addition, I guess maybe the Chinese have set up their San Forum, so maybe they think that dialogues can carry on there. But, the Secretary of War doesn't attend that. And if the Chinese Defense Minister doesn't attend the Shangri-La Dialogue, we may have two forums that's talking past each other rather than having real conversations. So if I may suggest, in order for there to be a better conversation in Shangri-La Dialogue, that IISS may want to consider sort of increasing, widening the representation of countries in Shangri-La Dialogue such that voices from different parts are more equally spread out and the Chinese won't feel that they are being put on the spot as often as maybe in the past they have been.
Despite that, we do know that the US-China relationship is going to be in focus, and this comes on the back of US President Donald Trump's visit to China, where we saw more positive signs and talk about stability. What will you be looking out for as indication of this stability that is spoken about by the two leaders?
I think for sure both sides are looking for stability. In that aspect, particularly, I think people look forward to listening to Secretary of War Hegseth's speech tomorrow. Last year, his speech was pretty tough, using language that's pretty tough, deterring aggression, forward deployment. So this year, I think people want to see whether the emphasis, the tone, the language is toned down in alignment with what the leaders see and Trump had agreed to sort of be to emphasize cooperation more than confrontation.
And we know that besides the US-China relationship, a lot of attention also has been on the situation in the Middle East that's looming in the background, the Iran war. We know that the situation in the Strait of Hormuz is affecting countries around the world, given the energy security concerns. How do you expect that to play out? Is Middle East instability going to overshadow some of perhaps the more traditional security concerns here in the Indo-Pacific, for example, over the South China Sea or Taiwan?
If you mean overshadow means that the Indo-China, or rather Indo-Pacific issues are of less importance, then I don't think it will overshadow at all. If anything, what's happening in Straits of Hormuz and the Middle East is informing regional countries what to think about how they should handle future crises. Coming on the back of the pandemic and then now Straits of Hormuz, I think many regional countries will understand and realize that their buffer to handle crisis is actually very low and their margin for error is very low. So if anything, if in the US, if in Iran, the US actually more or less had gained a military victory quite soon and yet cannot achieve a political outcome, if the Chinese and the US were to come to blows in the Taiwan Straits or East China Sea or South China Sea, what the regional countries will have to deal with will be much more severe. Yeah.
And that's something we'll be looking out for tomorrow when the US Defense Secretary gives his speech, and we'll be looking out for the reactions to that from not just the Chinese, but all the delegates that are represented here, 44 countries. But I want to talk about tonight. We know that we're expecting that keynote speech from the Vietnamese leader To Lam. We know that Vietnam has, been very careful about balancing its foreign policy. So when the Vietnamese leader gives his speech tonight, who do you think he'll be addressing? Will it be the region, US, China, or other countries?
I think there will be multiple levels. In the first place, he's probably speaking to his own people. The fact that he's coming to such a big forum to give a keynote speech, probably he would want to reflect that back to his citizens to see that Vietnam has really come of age, that it has that international stature. He probably want to tell his own people how he can bring sort of technological benefits, economic benefits back to Vietnam by engaging in such diplomacy. For the region, I would expect To Lam to be speaking of agency, of autonomy, and in that sense, encouraging other sort of small, middle countries to have that sense of agency, not to be sucked up in that US-Chinese confrontation, but to shape events to their own advantage. And I think Vietnam will probably be in a position to say that they are ready to contribute to that. So that will be something that's welcomed by all the smaller and middle countries. For the US and China, I would expect that he will want to tell the US that Vietnam is interested in further cooperation and collaboration, and that also Vietnam believes in the rule of law, in maritime security norms. For the Chinese, I think he will want to let the Chinese know that, again, he welcomes cooperation in deep ways, and also that he's not about to sort of slide into the US camp.
It won't be long before we hear him deliver that speech. But lastly, to wrap things up, could you just help us to put things into perspective? We're going into the weekend knowing that there's going to be a lot of speeches made, a lot of statements, rebuttals, probably sparks may fly. But what would you say would be the best outcome for the region at the end of this Shangri-La Dialogue on Sunday?
I think the best outcome will be that there's genuine conversation in the conference where people are really listening to each other, adjusting their position if they need to, taking it into account the general interest and each other's interests. It will be a pity if people are just talking past each other, making statements. For the middle countries, I think they will welcome opportunities, not just at the plenary sessions, but at a lot of the side meetings to discuss cooperation to increase the resilience of the region, of everybody. And then I guess for the US and the Chinese, they would want to probably use this opportunity to emphasize again that they have achieved some stability in their relationship.
Well, certainly a lot to look out for. We talked about US-China relationship, tonight's speech, and then also the Middle East situation. And also your point about, it's not just dialogue, but there are implications after this weekend as well for the overall security architecture. So thank you so much for sharing those expert insights with us. I was speaking with Mr. Ng Chi Kut, who is Director and CEO at the IISS Yusof Ishak Institute. Back to you, Telly.
There's some great insights there. Really enjoyed that interview. Thanks so very much. CNA Senior China Editor and Senior Correspondent Olivia Seong, live from the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore. Well, time now for another break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight. More coverage from the Shangri-La Dialogue right here in Singapore. New Zealand is in the middle of its biggest defence reset in years. Now, CNA's Tan Chiu Yi shares her conversation with Defence Minister Chris Penk right after this break. New Zealand is in the middle of its biggest defence reset in years, looking to nearly double its defence spend to 2% of GDP by 2033. But the New Zealand Defence Force has suffered from years of underfunding in peacetime, and there are questions about whether even this spending hike is enough. Well, Tan Chiu Yi joins us now live from the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. Chiu Yi, I believe you've just finished talking to New Zealand Defence Minister Chris Penk. Walk us through, what did he say?
It's a tough security environment, and after years of being protected by the seas, New Zealand now has to respond, to adapt, and to spend the money. Mr. Chris Penk was appointed Defence Minister last month, and this is his first outing at the Shangri-La Dialogue here in Singapore. I started by asking him whether New Zealand is looking to play a bigger role in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, I think New Zealand's always been present in the Indo-Pacific. Clearly, the Asia region is really important for us. We trade in important ways, both as export markets, but of course import too, strong people-to-people links. And for all the reasons that we consider ourselves an Asian nation, it's important that we retain those links and of course are present in a defence capacity. As for our Pacific Island neighbours, it's important that we support their aspirations and are respectful of their desire that we have an ocean of peace. So anything that we can do to contribute to that, and of course for others to see that part of the world in the same light, is helpful for us to be able to do. So we'll continue to do search and rescue activities, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief in the event of severe weather events and earthquakes and other natural disasters. And of course we want to contribute strongly as well in the field of fisheries protection, very dear to the hearts of our Pacific cousins, and also transnational organised crime such as drug smuggling.
Ocean of peace, you say, and you've also said that the seas are no longer a safety barrier for New Zealand. Today you call them actually vital national interests to be secured. From whom and from what?
Yeah, well, it's an interest to be secured against any external threat to New Zealand's way of life. And of course, as a maritime nation, we're heavily dependent on the sea. Once upon a time, it felt as though it was a buffer between us and the rest of the world, or a safety barrier, as we've said. But now, realising that we can't take for granted the territorial integrity of the 12 nautical mile limit that we have, but our exclusive economic zone and the other interests that we have in terms of freedom of navigation and of course the airways and on the sea routes as well. We know that we need to protect against any sovereign incursion or any threat to those kinds of interests that we have.
You're very careful not to name any names or define any specific threats here, but there have been recent incidents. China has accused the New Zealand patrol aircraft of harassment at sea last month, and last year the Chinese Navy held live fire drills in the Tasman Sea that diverted commercial flights. How close did these incidents get to becoming dangerous confrontations?
In terms of the People's Liberation Army Navy Task Force last year in the Tasman Sea that you've quite rightly referred to, we expressed publicly but also privately our unease with the fact that live firings took place in a way that disrupted commercial aviation. We know that it's important that we behave in a predictable, consistent, stable fashion, and we do, but we expect that of others too, including China. So with the recent incident in which China had said publicly that New Zealand was operating in an area that it was not entitled to. Our very clear view is actually, and as backed by the evidence of our navigation systems, that we were operating in exactly an area that we were entitled to do, and in fact conducting operations in support of the UN mandated sanctions against North Korea. So we have every right to be present in those ways, and we'll continue to do that.
How concerned are you about, further misunderstandings, miscalculations at sea with, the continuing presence of New Zealand in these regional waters?
Yeah, it's important for all key players in the region and everyone who's present, whether in the air or on the sea or on land for that matter, to act in a way that is both safe and professional. New Zealand will continue to do that, and we call on others to act in the same way.
The New Zealand Defence Force is small. 15,000 people in total, including reservists and civilian personnel. Last year, your predecessor, Julius Collins, actually said the NZDF was in ICU. Is the spending hike on defence to 2% of GDP enough to take the force out of intensive care?
Yeah, I think we're on the path to a much better place, and I think it's important that we have that upward trajectory, but of course, there's an open question about whether we should move faster. And every 2 years following the release of last year's Defence Capability Plan, we've committed to reviewing progress and, if necessary, speeding up our trajectory to 2% of GDP. But we won't review it in a way that would see us spend less. So in that sense, we're mindful of the need to react to circumstances as they change. In terms of personnel numbers, though, I think it's fair to say that while we have a relatively small defence force, and will always be small by international comparison to larger nations, at the same time we've got the opportunity through technological advancement, including in uncrewed systems, to be quite capable as a relatively small nation and without a lot of sailors and soldiers and aviators necessarily, to be able to punch above our weight.
Yeah, and you say that Singapore and New Zealand together can do force multiplying. What do you mean by that?
What I mean is that we're stronger together. So there's an aspect of interoperability that says if we have the same equipment, then we can understand those systems and work well together and cooperate in that way. But actually there's also a force multiplier element where if we have different systems, different expertise among our personnel in different niches, then in all kinds of different environments between us we can cover the eventualities. So it might be, for example, that New Zealand continues to have a replenishment ship. For example, we've got one at the moment that refuels Australian vessels quite often, and if we can do that work alongside Australia as well as Singapore, then we'll ensure that we've got our respective fleets out in the South China Sea or the Tasman Sea, as the case may be, or wherever on the globe, in a way that increases the ability and the capability of all.
The minister is adding diplomacy to that regional capability with a flurry of bilateral meetings here in Singapore. And that was New Zealand Defence Minister Chris Penk speaking to CNA here at the Shangri-La Dialogue. Back to you.
Thanks very much for that, Chui. All there reporting on the ground at the Shangri-La Dialogue. I'm going to leave you to take a bit of a breather because the highlight of tonight's opening of the Shangri-La Dialogue, which is a keynote speech by Vietnamese President To Lam, happening tonight. And CNA is covering that for you in full on Asia Tonight, coming to you in an hour. And our correspondents also have more from the venue of the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue. And that wraps up East Asia's Tonight for the Friday edition. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.